Grace Alliance Church this Easter morning. It is great to be here with you. If you're a guest today, thank you for coming. We do have refreshments afterwards, bagels and fruit. We'd love to have you stick around if you don't have plans for lunch and hang out, spend some time with us. You know, such a beautiful morning here. You know, driving to church and seeing the trees with their flowers and the forsythia bushes. We have a ton of forsythia. We've got a 100-foot section of forsythia. I hate them. They grow like crazy. But for about 2 weeks a year, I love them because they're so beautiful. My boys and I just came back from Arizona, New Mexico. And my wife texted us. She doesn't have as much vacation time as I do. And we were going to see my family and hike, which neither of those things are at the top of her list of things she wants to do with her vacation. And so she texted to say, do the boys want to move out there now? And they both said no, they really did not. So for everyone who lives in New Jersey and has a complex about being here, let me tell you, Arizona and New Mexico are beautiful, but we would take New Jersey anytime. So we're glad to be here with you today. We saw a video that I really enjoyed, and I want to begin by just sharing this video with you. Well, I really enjoyed that. You know, we see the dogs barking and then suddenly you realize that was a postal truck. I just love that. But the funny thing is, they almost seem like almost natural, right? Like a family just driving around. I love the expression of frustration on Mama Dog's face as they're behind that slow driver and she looks over like, come on, what are you going to do about it? It just seems so real, but we know it's not real. I mean, the commercial, though, it captures perfectly kind of the family, you know, the bathroom breaks where you're all running into these, you know, it just seems so real. The puppy, I love in that car seat in the back, you know, all tucked in. Again, it just seems so normal. Dad just driving around. But again, the fact is we all know it's not real. It's a commercial. They must have had dogs they trained really well. Maybe they threw in some special effects. So it's not true. Well, the fact is that the resurrection of Jesus Christ, if it's not true, then we're wasting our time here today. If the resurrection is smoke and mirrors, if it was just something fake like that commercial, then Christianity is not true. But if Jesus really rose from the grave, then he is worthy of all that we have in all of our lives. See, Easter is when we celebrate the empty tomb. Christians believe that Christ died on the cross, that God in human flesh came to give his life for us. But he didn't just die, a sad sacrificial martyr's death. He then rose again. And because of that, we can have life. We can celebrate it. Now, it was the worst kind of death possible. The Romans used the cross as a form of torture. Roman citizens could not be killed on crosses because it was considered to be too awful. The cross was meant to have you linger and die slowly so that you would experience the pain and so others could see you and know that they should not disobey. Before Christ was even put on the cross, he was scourged. The scourges back then would have had bone and rock tied to the leather thongs. His back was shredded. He was then hung on a cross with these huge nails, and he eventually died. Well, the fact is, it was an awful way to die. And yet God willingly did that for our sake. Well, Friday ends, and then Saturday comes and goes, and then it's Sunday morning, and the disciples find an empty tomb. Now, the resurrection of Jesus is absolutely central to our faith. As Michael Green put it, Christianity does not hold the the resurrection to be one of the many tenets of belief. Without faith in the resurrection, there would be no Christianity at all. The Christian church would never have begun. The Jesus movement would have fizzled out if it did not happen. The resurrection is what gripped the disciples. It took these scared men and women who were hiding up in a room, who then later would go out and change the world. As Gary Vendette points out, critics who discount the resurrection tend to portray the disciples either as gullible country folk or as shrewd conspirators who thought up the resurrection as a way to jumpstart their religion. Now, the skeptics propose several schemes to explain away the resurrection. One theory claims that Jesus fainted on the cross due to lack of blood, and then while in the cool tomb, he awakened. Now, this is so unlikely. First of all, again, the Romans scourged him. They tore his back apart. Then they used huge nails to place him on the cross. And Roman soldiers did this regularly. This was a normal form of capital punishment for the Romans. They knew what they were doing. When Jesus had finally died, the soldier stuck a spear in his side just to be sure he really was dead. And he was then placed in a tomb. For a couple of days, he would have been without water. And then, if that theory is true, he would have had to move the huge boulder, get past the 2 Roman soldiers, walk all the way back into Jerusalem with feet that had nail holes in them. I mean, that takes as much of a miracle as it would take for Jesus to be resurrected. Well, others claim the enemies of Jesus stole his body. But why would they do that? And if they did steal his body, once the disciples said he had risen again, wouldn't you just say, no, actually, we have his body, here it is. See, he's dead. Others argue that the apostles stole the body. But if you think they stole his body, then you haven't really read your New Testament, because it's very clear the disciples are just a scared group of guys. I mean, here are his 12 closest friends, and yet when Jesus is in his hour of need, they all run away. On the cross, they're nowhere to be found. They're not up there boldly proclaiming that they're followers of Christ. They wanted to save their own necks. And so it's inconceivable that these men would then later give their lives for what they knew to be a lie. I mean, people will give their life for something they believe in so much that they know it's true and they're willing to die for it. But would you die for a lie? Let's say you and your buddies get together and you come up with this lie about something, and then you're going to get huge punishment and killed for it. Would you lie for that? No, you'd say, listen, we made it up. It was all a story. But they didn't do that. 11 out of the 12 would later die for their faith, according to history. So they believed in the resurrection. All 4 Gospels record the events of that first Easter morning. And the fact that Jesus came back from the dead gives us hope, and it gives us a fresh start. How many of you here play golf? Are there any golf people? Okay. If you play golf, you know there's something called a mulligan in golf. And a mulligan is when you're golfing with your buddies. And maybe you're hitting off the tee, and you line up and you hit it, and boom, it goes that way. And it's an awful shot. Maybe it goes in a lake or it goes out of bounds. And you say to your buddies, can I have a mulligan? And a mulligan means a do-over. In other words, it's as if that ball was never hit. You get to try it again. And so the only people who know what you did are your buddies and maybe anyone you hit who was standing over there. But a mulligan is a second chance. And that's what Jesus offers us, a fresh start, a second chance. It's the resurrection of Jesus that makes this possible. In Romans 6:4, the Apostle Paul tells us, and just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glorious power of the Father, now we also may live new lives. So because of what Christ has done, we can have life. We can be made new. God promises us a fresh start if we'll turn to Jesus and allow him to make us new again. So today I want us to look at Matthew chapter 28 to see the events of that first Easter and what happened. Matthew chapter 28, beginning verse 1, says this. After the Sabbath, at the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. So Mary Magdalene and some other women were coming early in the morning before it was light. Now, they're going to take care of Jesus' body. And they do not expect that he's been raised from the dead. They fully expect him to be there lying in the grave. Now, in the first century, the graves of Jerusalem's wealthy people were cut into the limestone cliffs that surrounded the city. So as the Marys approach this tomb, they look and they see the grave has been rolled open. The huge stone is no longer there. And her assumption is that that there's been grave robbers, which was fairly common in that time. And that maybe they've broken in and stolen things. But she goes there and instead finds that there's an angel. Now Matthew gives us some more details and tells us that in the middle of the night there was an earthquake and that the angel rolled away the stone from a tomb. And that the angel opened the tomb not so Jesus could get out. Okay, Jesus was not inside knocking like, hey, somebody please. No, Jesus could get out anytime he wanted. But it was so that the disciples could come in and see that he was gone. He had arisen. Well, verse 3. His, that is the angel's appearance, was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you're looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here, he is risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay." So before daybreak, the angel descends and rolls the tombstone away, and the Roman guards are terrified. Here's this shining, bright white being, and they tremble as if they were dead. We learn from another passage that they end up running away in fear. All this happened before the women came. Mark mentions one angel, Luke 2, but these angels were probably only those who revealed themselves to the ladies, who let them see what was happening. There were probably more there. Now the angel then speaks to calm their fear, lets them know, listen, Jesus, don't be worried. His body wasn't stolen, he wasn't robbed. He's risen. He said, just as he said he would do. And so they enter the tomb and they find that his body is gone. Now, according to John's account, the most amazing thing that confronted the women as they entered this tomb was the fact that the body of Jesus was gone, but the grave clothes remained, lying as if wrapped around the place where his body should have been. Now, in those days, bodies were covered with ointments and oils. And they often had a resin base, and they would wrap them with linens. Sometimes a sheet was put around the body, and then it was wrapped with strips, almost like a mummy would. In a few days, the resin-based ointment and oils would soak through the bandages, and they would begin to set up. They would begin to almost harden. So in other words, if you were to take off those clothes, you would have to pull them apart, and they would no longer look the same. And so the ladies look at this, and they see, it appears as if the body just disappeared. How could that happen? Well, as they looked in the tomb, they were amazed. He was gone. And so the angel continues in verse 7. He tells them, "Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I've told you." So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. And suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. And they came to him, they clasped his feet and worshipped him. And then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." So the women were told to depart the tomb with mixed emotions. I mean, they're filled with fear, like what has happened? And yet they're also filled with awe. Jesus is risen? Well, they run away from there because they want to go tell the disciples this amazing news. And on the way, Jesus immediately meets them and he greets them and they fall to their feet and they begin to worship him. And that's what we do on Easter morning. In the face of the empty tomb, we bow down and we worship the risen Christ. It's the empty tomb that gives us hope today. I read about a letter that came from Health and Human Services to a resident of Greenville County, South Carolina, which stated this: "Your food stamps will be stopped effective March because we received notice that you passed away. You may reapply if your circumstances change." Only the government could write it out. Like what they should have said was, if we made a mistake, if we're in error, please, but if your circumstances change, then feel free to reapply. Well, the fact is, for Jesus, his circumstances did change. The empty tomb is a pledge that if we believe in Christ, we too can have new life and be raised. The great problem of the human soul finds a solution in the empty tomb. In the resurrection of Jesus, we're assured that this short, frustrating life that we live is not the end. It's not our destiny. The resurrection is real, and it does make a difference. Because of the resurrection, we have the power to live a new life. You know, if you go into a bookstore, I mean, if you can still find one, I don't know, I know Rutgers has a bookstore, so go into Rutgers bookstore. This may not be as true there, but if you go into a normal bookstore, if you look at the self-help section, it's normally huge. It's one of the biggest sections. Why? Because people want to change. They want to be different. It's how to find a job, how to feel better about yourself, how to look better, lose weight, all kind of things. And they're great ideas because people want to change. But the problem is the books cannot give you the power to make the change. And so it's kind of like a car without gasoline. It is absolutely worthless. Well, the fact is Jesus and his resurrection gives us the power to be different, to live right, to live the way God intended for us to live. In Ezekiel chapter 36, God says this, I will give you a new heart and will put a new spirit in you. I'll remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. In other words, a soft heart. And I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. So what God says is this, that if we'll come to him, he will change our heart of stone, our hardened hearts, and he'll make them soft towards him. He says, I'll give you my spirit so that you can live for God. See, he never intended for us to change ourselves. Jesus Christ does the work. We surrender, we submit, we allow him to move through us and in us. But it's the power of God. It's that resurrection power. If God could bring his son up out of the grave, God can certainly help us to do what we need to do. Imagine the power that broke the chains of death is the same power that can be at work in you. And if God's Spirit can defeat death, there's no sin that God can't handle, no attitude he can't change, no problem that's too big. If you want to have real power in your life, you need resurrection power. Because of the resurrection, we also have hope for the future. You know, what happens when you die? Does your life just flicker out and then that's the end? Contemporary philosopher Simon Critchley describes how 190 of history's most famous philosophers died. Here are some of the most interesting ones. Thomas Hobbes, who wrote that life is nasty, brutish, and short, actually lived to be 91 and died peacefully in his bed. So, not so short and not so nasty. Berkeley died when his wife was reading to him a sermon. Some of you understand that. You felt like you wished you could die while you listened to a sermon, but he actually did. Jean-Paul Sartre seemed to have a change of heart prior to his death. This longtime atheist said, I do not feel I am the product of chance, but a being whom only a creator could have put here. He died in 1980 of alcohol and after years of alcohol and drug abuse. Albert Camus, the famous atheist, once said he could not imagine a death more meaningless than dying in a car accident. In 1960, at the age of 47, he died in a car accident. A.J. Ayer, a resolute atheist, choked on a piece of salmon and technically died. Later, he said this near-death experience provided strong evidence that death does not end consciousness. His wife reported, Freddie has got so much nicer since he died. Well, he did die for good 1 year later. Now, according to the Bible, death is not the end. It's really the beginning. Because Jesus arose from the dead, the promise is that we will rise again. Matter of fact, Jesus says in John to his disciples, he says, in my Father's house there are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. He tells them, I go there to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you also may be. So this world is not the end that so many think it is. You know, in our culture, we're so attached to this world, to all that we have, when this is just a tiny bit of time before eternity begins. So be sure not to miss what the Bible says. In 1 John 2:17, it says this, the world and its desires pass away, but the person who does the will of God lives forever. It says in John 6:40, Jesus promises, for my Father's will is that everyone who looks to the Son and believes in him shall have eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. So this gives us hope that this is not the end. That God has so much more still planned for us. And that's great news. Because the resurrection really does make a difference. Jesus is the real walking dead. Not like zombies, the undead. Jesus is truly alive. A recent article says zombies have become outrageously, staggeringly, mind-blowingly popular. Talked about this a few months ago, but I just read recently that AMC's hit show The Walking Dead had 16 million viewers on the week of the Winter Olympics and almost had better ratings than the once every 4 years Olympics. World War Z, a movie about zombies with Brad Pitt, made over $500 million. So what's the big deal with the zombie craze? One expert on zombie lore, Dr. John Ulrich, says, at its most elemental level, the zombie represents our fear of death. Stephen March, a critic who writes for Esquire magazine, agrees, but as an atheist, March offers some honest thoughts about zombies and our own death fears. He writes this: after seeing dozens of zombie movies, I'm convinced the reason zombies are so powerful is that they capture an atheistic fear of the dead. I don't just mean the fear of dead bodies, though that fear is certainly there also. He says, atheism does not provide a very comforting way to deal with the dead. Christians and others have prayer and visions of an afterlife. Atheists like myself have rotting corpses and oblivion and zombie movies. Wow. I'm glad I have more than rotting corpses, oblivion, and zombie movies. That doesn't sound like a very fun way to live. Well, because of Jesus, death is not the end. It ushers us into eternity. But maybe you're here and you've never experienced the power of Christ in your life, His love in you. Maybe you're a doubter and not really a follower. And I can't think of a better time to become a follower of Jesus than on Easter Sunday, when we celebrate what He has done. You see, becoming a follower of Christ takes more than just an acknowledgement that Jesus died and rose from the dead. It's not enough to say intellectually, yes, I would agree that's probably true. You have to receive Christ into your life. You have to allow Him to come and live in you. You have to do more than know about Him. You need to experience the Savior who came for you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the message, my boys and I were out in Arizona and New Mexico for a week. And my sister and my parents all love to hike. And they warned me repeatedly, just watch out for rattlesnakes. So there's a lot of rattlesnakes. And again, another great thing about New Jersey. I mean, my parents were mentioning their next door neighbor has had multiple rattlesnakes in their yard. Any of you ever had a rattlesnake in your yard here in New Jersey? It's a great thing. It really is. So anyway, every time we go hiking, we'd be out in these middle of national forest, middle of nowhere. Truly, no one's around. You're by yourself. And we're hiking along. I kept telling the boys, watch for rattlesnakes. Watch for snakes. Guys, careful. Watch for snakes. Look where you're going. Watch for snakes. And the whole time, normally when I'm hiking, I'm just kind of looking here. I'm always keeping my eyes ahead. I'm scanning, just looking for snakes. Because I hate any snake, to be perfectly honest. It's just a garter snake. I don't care. It's a snake. I just don't like them, you know. It's because I'm a pastor, and biblically it was about, you know, it's not a fear thing. Let me be clear. It's biblical. I don't have time to go into all that right now. I just don't like, yeah, if someone has a pet snake, I'll touch it. Okay, great, yeah, that's wonderful. But I don't like snakes. So anyway, the boys and I, it's our last day of hiking. We haven't seen any snakes, which is great with me. And my parents, being from out there, they said, oh, did you see any bobcats? No, and I can't say I'm sorry about that, you know, I really. So the boys and I are hiking, and there's nobody around. We're the only ones in this area that we're in. And actually, there's a picture, Sal, if you'd go to the next one. So this was the area. It's part of the petrified forest. It's actually a piece of petrified wood above the boy's head there. They cemented underneath it so it wouldn't collapse, but it's literally wood that is turned to rock. And it was just like a bridge of solid rock. So anyway, we're hiking down, and we go actually over to the side here. We drop down the mountain to kind of an area where no one else is in. We like to go off-road. We don't like trails and stuff. We want to go experience it. We like boulders, so we're climbing up and down the mountainside, and we're in a gully, and David's going first. He tends to like to go first, which scares Joel and I, because David's be careful chip got broken at some point. And so anyway, he's doing fine. We're in a gully. It's fine, and he's ahead of me. And I go to take a step, and as my foot's about here, I hear this rattling sound. And I look down, and about that far away from my foot is the back 6 inches of a rattlesnake. Now, thankfully, it is moving away from me. It's going underneath a rock. But I say, boys, snake. And my tone was actually, I went up about an octave. I'm almost stepping on a rattlesnake. So I jump back, and I say, David's already passed it. He went around or something. So and Joel and I back up, and you know what? I'd heard about snakes. Mom and Dad told me about them. My sister told me about them. I actually read about them before going to make sure I knew enough about rattlesnakes to know what to do, not what to do. But experiencing a rattlesnake is different than hearing about a rattlesnake. And friends, the same is true of Jesus. You may have read about Jesus. People may have told you about Jesus. You may have heard about him. But experiencing him is a whole different thing. Coming to know him personally is completely different than just knowing about him. Having his Spirit live in you is different than hearing about his Spirit. And so today, I would encourage you to open yourself up to the one who loved you enough to die on a cross so that you could have new life and have hope. How do you do that? Well, you have to believe that Jesus is God. And not just God, but that he is the Lord of all. And that you are willing to serve him and want to serve him. You have to admit that you need forgiveness. That you need to be made clean. That you have done what the Bible calls sin. Sin is simply breaking any of God's rules. It's things like pride and selfishness and lust and anger and hatefulness. There's not a person here who hasn't sinned. I'll guarantee you there's not a person here who hasn't sinned this week. Multiple times. We all do. And that's why we need forgiveness. Well, after we ask for forgiveness, then we have to ask the Lord to come and truly be in control of our lives. Remember when God said that he would put his Spirit in us? That he would give us hearts of flesh, soft hearts? That's his desire then, is that we would allow him to be in control. That you would allow him to make you into the new person that God has created you to be. Someone better than you ever imagined. Following Christ doesn't ruin your life and take all the fun away. People I know who love Jesus the most are the most fun people I know to be around. Because there's a joy in them. Gloria Solorzano has a kindness that just wells up out of her. It is who Christ has made her to be. Friends, Jesus wants to do the same in your life today. Let's bow our heads together.